If there was anything more dangerous than conspiring in the heart of London, Tristan Hawthorne had yet to discover it. And yet, here he was, wearing the impassive expression of a man who could set the world ablaze without so much as creasing his deep navy velvet coat. The Duke of Ravensmore had a mission to restore his family's honor, and the man responsible for his suffering was just a few feet away, laughing amidst a circle of aristocrats. The ballroom was a feast for the senses. Gleaming chandeliers hung from the ceiling like captured constellations, and the walls were adorned with mirrors that reflected the frenzy of dances and conversations. Lady Alverton, the hostess, had ensured that no one would spare their praise for the event. Tristan, however, saw no glamour, only a strategic stage for his plan. His eyes were fixed on Lord Edmund Montgomery, the man he believed had destroyed his family. Edmund seemed at ease, even jovial, as he laughed at a joke told by an unfamiliar baronet. Every move the man made, every smile, seemed to mock the tragedy that had haunted Tristan since he was 18 years old. "My dear Duke, how long do you plan to observe the room like a general awaiting battle?" The voice was feminine and full of mischief. Lady Amelia Brighton, a childhood friend and reluctant confidant, approached. "Until the battle is won," Tristan replied curtly. "And how do you plan to win anything when you won't even approach your adversary? Unless, of course, your plan is to intimidate him with glares." Before he could retort, something else caught his attention. A young woman stumbled on her gown as she crossed the room with an air of urgency. Her brown hair escaped her coiffure in unruly strands, and she seemed unable to suppress her laughter at her own misstep. It was an unusual sight, for unlike the other ladies who acted as though the world was their audience, this one seemed utterly oblivious to what was expected of her. "Lady Isabelle Montgomery," Amelia murmured, following Tristan's gaze. "Lord Edmund's eldest daughter. Let me guess, she'll be your piece on the board, won't she?" Tristan remained silent. He hadn't planned for this. Isabelle Montgomery was not part of his scheme. But there was something about her that held his attention, something he couldn't quite define. Perhaps it was her vibrant brown eyes or the smile that emerged even in awkward situations, like now. "So," Amelia said with a mocking tone, "are you going to keep watching, or will you rescue her before she topples the entire ballroom decor?" Without thinking, Tristan crossed the room and extended a hand to Isabelle, who was still trying to steady herself. "Good heavens, I really need to learn how to walk," she said unceremoniously, accepting his help. "I think this might be the 8th time I've tripped in public this season." "Perhaps it's time to hire a dance instructor," Tristan replied with a restrained smile. "Or give up on attending balls altogether," Isabelle said, laughing. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected the genuine tone, free of artifice, which disarmed him more than any practiced smile ever had. "Duke of Ravensmore," he introduced himself, attempting to regain his composure. "Lady Isabelle Montgomery." "And yes, I know exactly who you are," she replied, inclining her head slightly. Her smile faded briefly, but returned almost immediately, this time with a defiant edge. Tristan was caught off guard. He had intended to use Isabelle to get to Edmund, but at that moment, he realized that perhaps she was the one already holding the reins of the game. If the Duke of Ravensmore had learned anything during his years in exile, it was the importance of staying one step ahead. And at that moment, as he watched Isabelle Montgomery smile with disconcerting confidence, he realized that, for the first time in a long while, he was perilously close to losing control. "So, Lady Isabelle," Tristan began, his tone casual, masking the tension coursing through him. "If you know who I am, I assume you also know what they say about me." "Oh, yes." She tilted her head, her gaze sparkling with a mix of curiosity and challenge. "The infamous reclusive Duke, the one who vanished from society without warning, only to return mysteriously years later. Quite the enigma, I must say." "Enigma or threat?" He raised an eyebrow. "Both, perhaps." Isabelle leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "But I can assure you, if you're a threat, you're a very well-dressed one." Tristan almost smiled. Almost. But there was something about her lightheartedness that disarmed him in an infuriating way. He couldn't forget why he was there, what Edmund Montgomery had done, and how Isabelle, knowingly or not, was part of the game. Before he could respond, a shadow appeared at his right. "Isabelle, my dear, I was wondering where you'd slipped off to." Lord Edmund Montgomery. The man himself. His presence carried the weight of a storm on the verge of breaking. He was a man of impeccably styled gray hair with a smile that was too polished to be genuine. "Father," Isabelle said, stepping back. Her tone was sweet, but Tristan noted the faint stiffness in her posture. "Ah, the Duke of Ravensmore." Edmund inclined his head with the politeness of a predator sizing up its prey. "It's good to finally meet you. I'm afraid we've been complete strangers until now." "Indeed," Tristan replied, weighing each word as though placing pieces on a chessboard. "But they say London is small. It was only a matter of time." The exchange was brief, but laden with unspoken subtext that Isabelle seemed to pick up on. She looked from Tristan to her father, then back to Tristan, as if trying to decipher a silent code between the two men. "I trust you're both enjoying yourselves," Edmund said, though his words felt more like a warning than a greeting. "Lady Isabelle, perhaps you should rest. We wouldn't want you overexerting yourself." "Yes, father," she replied, but there was something in her voice, something Tristan couldn't quite place. She turned to him with a polite smile. "I hope we meet again, Duke. Perhaps under more illuminating circumstances." And with that, she left, leaving Tristan alone with Edmund. "So, tell me, Duke," Edmund began, his tone dangerously casual. "What are your intentions toward my daughter?" Tristan didn't miss a beat. "Just courtesy, Lord Montgomery. It seems young ladies these days require a bit of assistance staying on their feet." Edmund laughed, but his eyes remained cold. "Well, I hope it's only that. The last thing we need is unnecessary complications." As Edmund walked away, Tristan stayed rooted, his gaze sweeping the ballroom with renewed determination. There was something about Isabelle, something he couldn't yet understand. And Edmund, with his insistence on controlling her, only reinforced the sense that there was more to this family dynamic than met the eye. As the music swelled and couples began to dance once more, Tristan made a decision. Isabelle Montgomery wouldn't just be a piece in his game. She would be the key to unraveling the secrets Lord Edmund was so desperately trying to keep hidden. In the days following the ball, Tristan Hawthorne found himself unable to push Isabelle Montgomery from his thoughts. There was something about her, something more complex than he was prepared to handle. Every smile, every word she spoke seemed to carry layers of meaning, and it left him uncomfortably intrigued. The opportunity to see her again arose quickly. An invitation for tea at the Montgomery residence arrived at his door, signed by Isabelle herself. Tristan was surprised. He hadn't expected her to take the initiative, but at the same time, he recognized the chance to deepen his investigation. When he arrived at the house, he was greeted with the usual pomp. Servants lined up at the entrance, and a housekeeper led him through a corridor adorned with portraits of ancestors who seemed to stare at him with silent judgment. "Duke of Ravensmore," Isabelle's voice echoed before he even reached the main parlor. She stood on the staircase, descending with the grace of a lady and the boldness of someone who didn't care about breaking rules. "Lady Isabelle," he replied, inclining his head politely. "Thank you for the invitation. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Oh, nothing beyond tedious embroidery and discussions about the latest hat trends," she said with a mischievous smile. "I thought you might be a welcome distraction." "Should I feel flattered or manipulated?" "Both, perhaps." They exchanged a glance, the silence between them charged with an energy difficult to ignore. But Isabelle wasn't the type to let silence linger for long. "Let's go to the garden. It's much nicer there, and my father won't be tempted to interrupt," she said. leading him down a side corridor that opened onto a patio filled with blooming rose bushes. As they walked, Tristan carefully analyzed her every word, searching for clues. She appeared relaxed, but there was something in her posture, a tension he couldn't overlook. "I must confess," she said finally, turning to face him. "I know why you're here." He stopped abruptly. "Oh, do you?" "Yes." She gave him a small smile, crossing her arms. "You're investigating my father. You want to uncover something about him, don't you?" Tristan kept his expression neutral, though his heart quickened. "What makes you think that?" "Because I would do the same if I were in your place." There was a disarming sincerity in her voice. Isabelle didn't seem to be playing a game, which only made Tristan more suspicious. "And if I am investigating?" he asked. "Are you here to confront me or to help me?" She hesitated, her smile fading for a moment. "I don't know. I suppose it depends on what you're looking for." "And what do you think I'm looking for?" "Justice," she said, her honesty catching him off guard. Before he could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps interrupted them. Both turned to see Lord Edmund approaching, his face a mask of displeasure. "Isabelle," he said, his tone sharp as a blade. "What exactly do you think you're doing here with the Duke?" Isabelle didn't back down. "Talking. Is that forbidden now, Father?" Edmund shot a cold glare at Tristan. "Duke, I fear we're forgetting the norms of propriety. Perhaps it's best we return indoors." Tristan recognized the implicit challenge in Edmund's words, but chose to retreat. For now. Forcing a confrontation at this moment would be unwise. As he took his leave, his thoughts swirled. Isabelle seemed to know more than she was willing to admit, and Edmund was clearly hiding something. What Tristan didn't yet realize was that, by accepting Isabelle's invitation, he had just stepped into a far more dangerous game than he had anticipated. Tristan barely slept that night. Isabelle's words echoed in his mind like a riddle begging to be solved. Justice. She knew something, perhaps more than she should, and that left him torn between fascination and distrust. The next morning, he decided he needed answers. Instead of waiting for another formal occasion, he opted for a more direct approach. Tristan sent a brief note to Isabelle, inviting her for a morning stroll in Hyde Park. To his surprise, or perhaps not, she accepted. They met by the edge of the lake, where carriages rolled by in the distance and birds dipped into the still water. Isabelle wore a light blue walking dress, simple yet elegantly tailored, and adjusted her hat with casual ease. "Duke," she said with a smile as he approached, "I had a feeling we hadn't finished our conversation yesterday." "That's an understatement, Lady Isabelle," Tristan replied, bowing slightly. "I'd say we barely began." They started walking side by side, their pace unhurried, but the tension between them was palpable. "You're more determined than I expected," she said after a few moments of silence, glancing at him sideways. "And you're more intriguing than you seem," he replied bluntly. She laughed, though the sound carried a hint of nervousness. "I imagine that's a compliment, though I suspect it comes with caveats." "That depends on your intentions." Isabelle stopped, turning to face him. Her expression grew serious, her brown eyes studying him carefully. "You're not going to stop, are you?" "No," he said, equally serious. "If there's something you know, something that could help me uncover what happened to my family, I need to hear it." She averted her gaze, biting her lip as though weighing a significant decision. When she looked back at him, there was a newfound resolve in her eyes. "I don't know everything," she began, her voice low, almost a whisper. "But I do know my father is involved in things that aren't noble, things he hides from everyone, even me. Ever since I was a child, I've felt that something was wrong. He's a man who controls everything around him, including people." "And you?" Tristan asked, stepping closer. "Are you under his control as well?" "Sometimes I think I am," she admitted, her tone softer now. "But I'm learning to fight against it. That's why I'm here, speaking to you." Before Tristan could respond, hurried footsteps interrupted them. A servant appeared, clearly out of breath, clutching a letter. "Lady Isabelle," the man said, bowing quickly. "It's from your father. He demands your immediate presence at home." Isabelle's face hardened, though she maintained her composure. "Tell him I'll be there shortly." The servant hesitated, casting a wary glance at Tristan, but Isabelle dismissed him with a firm gesture. "This isn't good," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "It seems Edmund doesn't like seeing us together," Tristan observed, folding his arms. "It's not you he fears," Isabelle replied with a shadowed smile. "It's what I might say to you." Before leaving, she placed a hand on Tristan's arm. "I know you want answers, and I want to help, but there are things I have to protect. Please be careful, Duke. My father isn't a man who forgives easily." As she walked away, Tristan stood still, watching her vanish into the distance. Every word she had spoken seemed heavier than the conversation itself. Edmund Montgomery wasn't just a powerful man, he was a dangerous one. And Tristan realized that by getting closer to Isabelle, he wasn't just investigating a crime from the past. He was stepping into a deadly game where the rules could change at any moment. Night fell over England with a somber intensity as Tristan's carriage crept slowly along the road leading to Rosewood Estate. The place he had sworn never to set foot in again now loomed before him, shrouded in shadows and mysteries. He held Isabelle's letter in one hand, his other clenched into a tight fist. He wasn't sure if he could trust her, but the promise of answers was irresistible. When he arrived, the abandoned mansion appeared even more desolate than he remembered. The windows were shattered, the paint on the walls peeling, and vegetation had overtaken what was once a pristine garden. The wind howled through the cracks, as if the place itself harbored the echoes of the tragedy that had unfolded there. Tristan stepped down from the carriage and walked slowly toward the entrance. There were no servants, no other carriages. For a moment, the thought of a trap seemed inevitable, but he pushed the doubt aside. He needed to hear what Isabelle had to say. "Duke." Her voice called to him from the darkness, soft but laced with urgency. Isabelle emerged from behind a marble column, dressed in a simple dark coat that contrasted with her usual confident demeanor. Now she seemed tense, almost vulnerable. "You came," she said, as if unsure he would answer her call. "Of course I came," Tristan replied, his voice low and controlled. "Now, I hope you'll tell me what's so important that it warrants meeting here." Isabelle took a deep breath, glancing around as though afraid of being overheard. "My father is hiding something about what happened to your family." "That's not news to me," he said impatiently. "What do you know, Isabelle?" She hesitated, crossing her arms as if shielding herself from the cold wind, or from her own guilt. "A few months ago, I overheard my father arguing with someone. I couldn't hear everything, but he mentioned the fire and something about how it needed to be erased from history." Tristan stepped closer, his intense gaze cutting like a blade. "And you didn't think to tell me this before?" "I was afraid," she admitted, her brown eyes fixed on his. "But now, something has changed. He knows we're meeting, and I'm almost certain he's planning something. He doesn't trust me, and for good reason." Before Tristan could respond, a noise cut through the air. Footsteps, hurried and deliberate. Isabelle turned, and Tristan pulled her behind a column, both of them disappearing into the shadows. "Who's there?" Edmund Montgomery's voice echoed through the empty hall of the mansion. He held a lantern, his eyes scanning the room with alarming intensity. Beside him, two burly men carried firearms. "I know you're here," Edmund called, his tone menacing. "Isabelle, if you think you can deceive me, you're underestimating my reach." Isabelle gripped Tristan's arm, her fingers trembling slightly. "He can't find us," she whispered. "Why is he so desperate?" Tristan murmured, more to himself. "Because there's something here," Isabelle replied in a barely audible voice. Something he's afraid you'll find. Before they could continue, Edmund moved toward a side room. Search everywhere, he ordered the men. Tristan realized this was their chance. If they wanted answers, they needed to act quickly. He grabbed Isabelle's arm and whispered, "Do you have any idea what we're looking for?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite decipher. "There's a safe," she said finally. "Behind the library. I saw it once when I was a child. That's where he keeps secrets." The two moved silently, guided by Isabelle's memory. The deserted hall led them to a heavy oak door. Tristan turned the handle and the door creaked softly as it opened. Inside the library, the air was thick with the smell of mold and old paper. Isabelle pointed to a bookshelf in the corner. Behind that shelf. Tristan didn't hesitate. He began pushing the heavy piece of furniture, revealing a small iron door embedded in the wall. There was a padlock, but he had come prepared, pulling a tool from his pocket. "You always carry that?" Isabelle asked, a faint attempt at humor amid the tension. "A man needs to be ready for the unexpected," he replied, not taking his eyes off the lock. Finally, the safe opened with a dry click. Inside was a stack of aged papers, and on top, a leather-bound journal. Tristan grabbed it and flipped through the pages quickly. There it was. Details of payments, secret correspondences, and a single entry that made his blood run cold. Rosewood Estate. The Hawthorns eliminated as planned. Nothing traceable. "My God," Isabelle murmured, peering over his shoulder. Before they could process what they had found, they heard footsteps approaching the library. Edmund was almost there. "Run," Tristan said, clutching the journal tightly. "And you?" Isabelle asked, her voice filled with fear. "I'll handle it." As she slipped out through a side door, Tristan prepared himself. Edmund could no longer deny the truth. Through the slightly open door, Isabelle saw Edmund and his men closing in on Tristan. "Stop!" she shouted, stepping into the room before she could reconsider. "Isabelle," Edmund said, turning to face her, "you really don't know when to quit, do you?" "I know enough," she replied, her gaze steady on her father. "If you think you can continue this without consequences, you're mistaken." Edmund sighed, shaking his head. "You truly don't understand, my dear. Everything I've done was for our family. To protect our name, our position. You'll never know what it's like to bear the weight of so many responsibilities. And destroying other people's lives is the price you're willing to pay?" Isabelle stepped forward, her anger finally boiling over. "You destroyed the Hawthorns, and now you want to destroy Tristan too?" "Stay out of this, Isabelle," Edmund replied coldly. "You don't know anything." "She knows enough," Tristan interjected, clutching the journal tightly. "And now the whole world will know too." Edmund took a step closer, but before he could move further, Isabelle grabbed a torch from one of the guards and held it threateningly. "One more step, and I'll do something we'll all regret," she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. For a moment, no one moved. Then Edmund gave a dark smile. "You don't have the nerve, Isabelle. Care to test that?" A long, tense pause followed before Edmund finally stepped back, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Very well. If this is how you want to play, so be it." He signaled to his men, who lowered their weapons. "But remember, both of you, this isn't over. I'll be watching." With that, Edmund left, his men close behind. When the door closed, Isabelle let the torch fall and turned to Tristan. "Are you all right?" she asked, her tone softer now. Tristan nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on the journal. "I have enough to bring him down," he said, but there was a hint of doubt in his voice. "Then do it," Isabelle urged, her resolve clear. "Expose him. End this." He looked at her for a long moment, admiring her strength. "Do you know what this means for you?" "It means I'll finally be free." Tristan took a deep breath and grasped her hand. "Then we'll do it together." As they left the mansion, the journal still clutched tightly in Tristan's hands. They both knew the fight was far from over. But for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. Epilogue. A new beginning. Spring arrived with the gentleness of a fulfilled promise, filling London's gardens with the fragrance of newly bloomed flowers and the melody of returning birds. Yet the spirit of renewal was felt not only in the city's parks and salons, but also in the lives of Tristan and Isabelle. The scandal involving Edmund Montgomery had dominated society's whispers for weeks. The journal, handed over to the authorities, revealed illicit dealings, conspiracies, and his direct connection to the fire at Rosewood Estate. Edmund had lost his position, his properties, and, most importantly, his reputation. Now, he lived in exile on a distant estate, a man broken by his own ambition. For Isabelle, it was a relief, but also a sorrow. Edmund was her father, and despite all his wrongdoings, there was still a part of him she desperately wished to understand. But above all, she knew she needed to move forward. Tristan watched Isabelle as she walked through the garden of the new property he had purchased, a modest home, at least by a duke's standards, in the countryside. Here, silence and tranquility replaced the frenzied whirl of London's social scene. "You seem deep in thought," he said, approaching her with a gentle smile. "Just reflecting," she replied without looking at him. "Everything happened so quickly. Some days it still feels like a dream." "A dream or a nightmare?" She laughed, finally turning to face him. "A little of both, maybe, but definitely with a better ending than I expected. I could never have done it without you, Isabelle." Tristan took her hands, his brown eyes locking onto hers. "You were my ally when I needed one most, and more than that, you brought something back into my life that I thought I had lost forever." "And what is that?" "Hope," he said simply. For a moment, they stood in silence, surrounded by birdsong and the whisper of the wind. Then Tristan took a step closer, leaning slightly forward. "Isabelle," he began, his voice almost hesitant. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know it doesn't make sense without you by my side." She stared at him, her heart racing. "Tristan, are you asking me to stay?" He interrupted with a smile. "Just stay. Wherever you choose to be, that's where I want to be too." Isabelle laughed, a free, unburdened laugh, as if all the weight of the past had finally been lifted. "You always have a way of making everything seem so simple, Duke. Maybe that's because, with you, it really is." She didn't respond with words, but pulled him closer, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like more than an ending. It was the beginning of something new. In the months that followed, they focused on rebuilding. Tristan dedicated himself to restoring the Hawthorne name, while Isabelle found her own voice, free from Edmund's shadow. Together, they turned the past into a foundation for the future. Rosewood Estate, the mansion where it all began, became a symbol of renewal, not a reminder of tragedy, but a place where new memories would be made. Memories of love, justice, and above all, freedom. And so, under England's clear skies, Tristan and Isabelle embarked on a new journey, knowing that while the past could never be forgotten, it would no longer define them. If you thought Tristan and Isabelle's story was intense, wait until you meet Margaret and Edward, the protagonists of an equally fascinating tale with a new dilemma. How do you love when scandal threatens to destroy everything? Picture yourself in Regency high society, where secrets are weapons, and pride is the greatest barrier to true love. In the video Duke, Pride and Scandal, An Impossible Marriage, Charstart, Love Stories, you'll discover whether a stubborn duke and a determined lady can overcome their differences before it's too late. What we learned today. The past may cast a shadow, but it can also inspire new beginnings. Love, even in the toughest of times, is a transformative force. Choosing between pride and vulnerability is a battle worth watching. Comment, Love conquers pride if you enjoyed the video. Enjoyed this idea? Then subscribe to the channel and give it a like if you love lighthearted and romantic stories. Don't forget to check the pinned comment for links to Regency novels I've read and recommend. Hit play and dive into another thrilling story because love, with all its challenges, never goes out of style.